Margaret Harrison sat in the velvet armchair by her bedroom window, the same chair where she had rocked her son, David, to sleep 40 years ago. The afternoon light filtered through lace curtains, casting shadows that danced across her weathered hands. She was 72 now, and the weight of what she was about to tell pressed against her chest like a stone. This story began on a Tuesday morning in September, though the seeds had been planted long before that. Margaret had woken early, as she always did, and made her coffee in the same blue ceramic mug David had given her for Mother's Day when he was 12. She remembered his small hands presenting it to her, the pride shining in his eyes. That boy had loved her once. She was certain of it. The phone call came at 8:15. David's voice was clipped, businesslike. "Mother, we need to discuss the property." Not hello, not how are you, just business. Margaret's fingers tightened around the mug. The property. He meant the 20-acre estate in Riverside County, the land her husband Thomas had spent 30 years building into something valuable. Orchards and vineyards, a small farmhouse, water rights. Worth nearly $2 million now, the lawyer said. What about it, David? Her voice remained steady, though her heart had begun its familiar, anxious rhythm. Jennifer and I have been thinking. You're getting older. Living alone in that big house isn't safe. We think it's time to consider your options. Jennifer, his wife, the woman who had slowly, methodically replaced Margaret in every photograph, every family gathering, every moment that mattered. Margaret closed her eyes. She had seen this coming for months, perhaps years. The signs had been there. The canceled visits, the forgotten birthdays, the distance growing between them like a chasm, widening with each passing season. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing her son reduce her life to a problem that needed solving, cut deeper than she had anticipated. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs, David. Are you? There was an edge to his voice now, because from where Jennifer and I stand, it looks different. You're alone. You're not getting any younger. What happens when you fall, when you get sick? We're concerned, Mother, concerned. The word tasted bitter in her mouth. If they were truly concerned, they would visit more than twice a year. If they were concerned, David would answer when she called instead of letting it go to voicemail. If they were concerned, Jennifer wouldn't have started calling her Margaret instead of Mom 3 Christmases ago. I appreciate your concern, she said carefully, but I'm not ready to make any decisions about the property. Silence stretched between them. Then David's voice came again, harder now. We need to talk about this in person. Jennifer and I will come by Saturday. 2:00. He hung up before she could respond. Margaret sat very still for a long time after that call ended. The coffee had gone cold in her cup. Outside her window, the oak tree that Thomas had planted the year they were married swayed in the wind. 43 years that tree had grown. 43 years since she had stood beside Thomas in this very house and promised to build a life together, and they had built it. through lean years and abundant ones, through Thomas's cancer and the grueling treatments, through the joy of David's birth and the sorrow of 3 miscarriages after. They had built something solid, something that would last. Thomas had been so proud of this estate. He had walked every acre of it, even when the cancer had made walking difficult, even when the doctor said he should rest. "This is for David," Thomas had whispered to her in his final days, "and for David's children. Our legacy, Maggie, our legacy." But David had no children. He and Jennifer had decided against it years ago. Too expensive, Jennifer said. Too much responsibility. They preferred their freedom, their frequent trips to Europe, their sleek condo in the city with its modern art and minimalist furniture. There was no room in that life for mess, for chaos, for the beautiful disorder that children brought. Margaret rose from her chair and walked through her house, this house that held 43 years of memories. She traced her fingers along the kitchen counter where she had taught David to make his first batch of cookies. She paused in the hallway where pencil marks on the doorframe tracked his growth from age 5 to 18. She stood in the living room where Thomas had died, where she had held his hand and watched the life leave his eyes, where she had promised him she would protect everything they had built. Saturday arrived with cruel swiftness. Margaret dressed carefully in a navy blue dress, pearl earrings, her silver hair swept into an elegant bun. She wanted to look dignified. She wanted David to remember who she was, who she had always been. Not a problem to be solved, not an obstacle to be managed, but his mother, the woman who had given him life, who had sacrificed her career as a schoolteacher to raise him, who had poured every ounce of love she possessed into making him into a good man. Where had that good man gone? When had he transformed into this stranger who spoke to her in boardroom tones? They arrived precisely at 2. David drove a silver Mercedes, the 3rd one he had owned in as many years. Jennifer emerged from the passenger side wearing designer sunglasses and a cream pantsuit that probably cost more than Margaret spent on groceries in 6 months. She carried a leather briefcase. A briefcase. To visit your mother-in-law. Margaret opened the door before they could knock. "David, Jennifer, please come in." Jennifer's smile was professional, the kind she might offer a client. "Margaret, you look well." They settled in the living room. Margaret offered coffee. Jennifer declined. David accepted, though he barely touched it. He sat forward on the sofa, his hands clasped between his knees, and Margaret realized with a pang that he wouldn't meet her eyes. "Mother," he began, "we've come to discuss something important. Jennifer and I have been reviewing your financial situation, and we have some concerns." "My financial situation?" Margaret's voice remained calm. "I wasn't aware you had access to my financial information." Jennifer spoke for the first time. "David is your next of kin. As your family, we have a responsibility to ensure you're making sound decisions." Family. The word fell hollow between them. David cleared his throat. "The thing is, Mother, Maintaining this estate is expensive. Property taxes, upkeep, utilities. You're living on Dad's pension and Social Security. It's not sustainable. I manage perfectly well. Do you? Jennifer opened her briefcase and withdrew a folder. Because according to public records, you took out a home equity loan 2 years ago. $20,000. That suggests financial stress. Heat flooded Margaret's cheeks. Yes, she had taken that loan to pay for David and Jennifer's wedding reception at the country club. Because when David had come to her, nervous and excited, saying Jennifer wanted a beautiful wedding, but they couldn't quite afford the venue she had her heart set on. What was Margaret supposed to do? She had given her only son money for his wedding. What mother wouldn't? She had never mentioned the loan to David, had never asked for repayment. It was a gift, freely given, because that's what mothers did. They gave without counting the cost. That loan was for personal reasons, Margaret said quietly. It's being paid. At considerable expense to your monthly budget, Jennifer countered. She withdrew more papers. We've also noticed you've been selling possessions, the antique dining set, your mother's china collection, Thomas's vintage record collection. Margaret's hands clenched in her lap. Yes, she had sold those things. Because 3 months ago, David had called saying he and Jennifer were in a tight spot. An investment had gone bad. They needed help. Could she possibly loan them $15,000? Just until they got back on their feet. They would pay her back, of course. Of course they would. She had sold her mother's china to give her son money, the china that had survived 3 generations, that had graced holiday tables and anniversary celebrations. Gone, so David and Jennifer could cover their losses. They had never paid her back. They had never mentioned it again. What I do with my possessions is my concern, Margaret said. David finally looked at her. His eyes held something she couldn't quite read. Guilt, determination. Mother, we think it's time to sell the estate. The market is strong right now. You could live comfortably in a nice assisted living facility. Maybe even a small condo if you prefer. We've researched some options. There's a lovely place in Scottsdale, near Jennifer's parents. Scottsdale, Arizona, 1,000 miles from here. From the home she had built with Thomas. From the community she had known for 40 years. From the garden where Thomas's ashes were scattered beneath the rose bushes. And the money from the sale, Margaret asked, though she already knew. Jennifer answered. Well, naturally, David would need to be involved in managing it, to ensure it's invested properly. For your care. There it was. The truth laid bare. They wanted the estate. They wanted to sell her home, scatter her to some facility far from everything she knew, and take control of $2 million. For her care, they claimed, for her benefit. Margaret stood. Her legs trembled, but she kept her spine straight. No, David blinked. Mother, no, she repeated, stronger now. This estate is mine. Thomas left it to me. I will decide what happens to it, and when. Not you, not Jennifer. Jennifer's professional mask slipped. revealing something cold beneath. "Margaret, you're being unreasonable. We're trying to help you." "Help me," Margaret's voice rose for the first time. "By taking my home, by shipping me off to Arizona, by managing money that isn't yours. That's not help, Jennifer. That's theft dressed up in concern." David stood too, his face flushing. "Mother, you're not thinking clearly. You're emotional. This is exactly why we're worried about you making major decisions. I'm 72 years old, not senile. I've managed this estate since your father died. I've paid every bill, maintained every acre, made every decision. Successfully, without your help. You took out a loan," David said. "You've been selling family heirlooms. Those aren't the actions of someone managing successfully." Margaret felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. "I took out that loan to pay for your wedding reception, David. I sold my mother's china to give you $15,000 when you said you needed it. Everything I've done, every sacrifice I've made, has been for you." Silence descended like a shroud. David's face went pale. Jennifer's expression hardened. "We never asked you to do those things," David said finally, quietly. Those words struck Margaret with the force of a physical blow. Never asked, as if her love, her generosity, her willingness to sacrifice meant nothing because he hadn't explicitly requested it. "Get out," she whispered. "Mother, get out of my house." They left. Jennifer's heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. David paused at the door, half turned as if to say something, then thought better of it. The Merceds pulled away, leaving only dust hanging in the afternoon air. Margaret did not follow them to the door. She remained standing in the living room long after the sound of the Merceds faded down the drive, listening as the house returned to its natural quiet. No slammed doors, no raised voices, just absence settling gently into familiar rooms. She waited for something to rise inside her: anger, panic, grief. None came. Instead, there was a stillness so complete it surprised her. Margaret moved slowly through the house, not in search of anything, but as if retracing the outline of a life. Her fingers brushed the back of the sofa. Thomas had insisted on keeping long past its fashion. She paused at the bookshelf, where David's childhood books still stood in uneven rows. She stopped in the kitchen, resting her hand on the worn counter, where she had prepared thousands of meals, without ever thinking of them as sacrifice. Nothing here had been built for David. It had been built with him, but it had belonged to her life. She caught her reflection in the hallway mirror and stopped. The woman looking back at her was older than the one she remembered, her face marked by years of restraint rather than weakness. There was no apology in her eyes, no pleading, only recognition. Margaret realized then that she had spent decades proving her worth through usefulness, mistaking endurance for love, generosity for belonging. She had believed that if she made herself indispensable, she would never be left behind. But standing there alone, she understood something with a clarity that left no room for argument. She had been whole long before anyone needed her. Her value had never come from being relied upon. It had come from the quiet constancy with which she had lived, showing up, building, loving without spectacle. Those things did not disappear simply because someone else failed to see them. She inhaled deeply, feeling her breath settle in her chest. For the first time, she did not feel diminished by being alone. She felt complete. Margaret turned away from the mirror and walked back to the living room, lowering herself into the velvet armchair by the window. The chair held her easily, as it always had. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the orchard, light resting gently on land she knew by heart. She folded her hands in her lap and sat, not waiting, not bracing, but anchored. Whatever came next would be chosen, not endured. And that was the moment Margaret Harrison truly claimed what had always been hers. Margaret walked to Thomas's study. She hadn't changed anything since his death. His law books still lined the shelves. His reading glasses sat on the desk. She opened the bottom drawer and withdrew the folder she had kept there for years. Insurance policies, property deeds, bank statements, her will. She sat at Thomas's desk and began to read, really read, every document. And as she read, something crystallized inside her. A cold, clear certainty. David wanted her property. Jennifer wanted her money. Neither wanted her. Fine. If they thought her emotional, if they thought her incapable, if they thought they could manipulate her into surrendering everything Thomas had worked for, they were badly mistaken. Margaret Harrison was not done yet. The next morning, Margaret called her attorney. Samuel Chen had handled Thomas's estate and had known their family for 20 years. When she explained what had happened, what David and Jennifer had proposed, his response was immediate. Margaret, don't do anything hasty, but also don't do anything you're uncomfortable with. That estate is yours. You have every right to protect it. I want to change my will, she said. All right. Let's talk about what you want. What did she want? Margaret sat in her kitchen, morning light streaming through windows, and thought about that question. What did she want for the legacy she and Thomas had built? She wanted it to matter. She wanted it to go to someone who would value it, who would understand the love and labor that had created it. She wanted it to honor Thomas's memory, not be liquidated for a luxury vacation or a new car. David was her only child, but there were other ways to leave a legacy. I want to establish a foundation, Margaret told Samuel, the Thomas Harrison Memorial Scholarship Foundation, for children from farming families who want to go to college. The estate will fund it. The property will be sold after my death, and the proceeds will create an endowment. Samuel was quiet for a moment, and David receives a bequest of $50,000. That's generous, I think. More than I received from my own parents. Margaret, are you certain? Once this is done, I'm certain, Samuel. Draw up the papers. But changing her will was only the beginning. Margaret began making other changes too. She had been sending David money monthly for years. $500, ostensibly to help with expenses, though he and Jennifer both had good jobs. She canceled those transfers. She removed Jennifer's name from her life insurance beneficiaries. She closed the joint credit card she had opened years ago that David occasionally used. She expected backlash. She expected David to call, angry and demanding explanations. But weeks passed in silence. He didn't call. He didn't visit. It was as if, once denied what he wanted, she had ceased to exist for him. That silence hurt worse than any argument would have. October arrived, then November. The orchard required attention, and Margaret hired workers to help with the harvest. She worked alongside them, her hands moving through familiar motions, picking apples and pears that would be sold at the local farmer's market. The physical labor exhausted her, but felt good. Real, honest. Thanksgiving approached. In previous years, David and Jennifer had come for dinner, though often arriving late and leaving early, checking phones throughout the meal. This year, Margaret didn't extend an invitation. On Thanksgiving morning, as she prepared a small meal for herself, the doorbell rang. She opened it to find a young woman standing on her porch. Early 30s, auburn hair pulled into a ponytail, green eyes that looked nervous but determined. She held a covered dish. "Mrs. Harrison, I'm Rachel Torres. I live about 2 miles down the road. I hope I'm not intruding. But I heard you might be spending Thanksgiving alone, and I thought, well, I made extra sweet potato casserole, and I wondered if you'd like some company." Margaret stared at this stranger, this young woman who had driven 2 miles to bring food to someone she didn't know, and felt something crack open inside her chest. "I would love some company," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Please come in." They spent Thanksgiving together. Rachel told her story over slices of turkey and homemade pie. She was a veterinarian, had recently moved to the area to escape an abusive relationship. She was starting over, trying to build a life from scattered pieces. She had heard about Margaret from neighbors, heard about the elderly woman living alone on the beautiful estate, and something had compelled her to reach out. "I know what it's like to feel alone," Rachel said quietly. "I know what it's like when family turns their back on you." Margaret found herself talking in ways she hadn't in years. About Thomas, about the early days of their marriage, the struggles and triumphs. About David, the bright boy who had loved nature and books, who had talked about becoming a teacher like his mother. About the man David had become, and the distance that had grown between them. Rachel listened without judgment, without offering empty platitudes. She simply listened. If this story is resonating with you, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. These stories are created for those who value depth, dignity, and real human experiences, and your support helps keep them alive. As Rachel was leaving that evening, she turned at the door. "Mrs. Harrison, would you mind if I visited again? I could help around the property. I grew up on a farm, I know my way around orchards and gardens." "I would like that very much," Margaret said. "And please, call me Margaret." Rachel became a regular presence at the estate. She came on weekends, helping with chores, bringing her dog Rusty, who bounded through the orchards with puppyish joy. They worked together in companionable silence, or talked for hours over coffee. Rachel never asked for anything. She simply gave her time, her energy, her friendship. One Saturday in December, as they were pruning rose bushes, Rachel said carefully, "Margaret, I hope this isn't too forward, but I wanted you to know you've become very important to me these past few weeks. Getting to know you, working here, it's meant more than I can say. You've made me feel like I have family again." Margaret's hands stilled on the pruning shears. Family. This young woman who owed her nothing, who had known her mere weeks, spoke of family with more sincerity than her own son had shown in years. "You've become important to me too, Rachel," Margaret said softly. Christmas approached. On December 20th, David called, his first contact in 3 months. "Mother, Jennifer, and I would like to come for Christmas dinner." Not "how are you?" Not "I've missed you." Just an announcement, an expectation of hospitality. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Margaret said calmly. "I have other plans." Silence. Then other plans. "With whom?" "With friends." "Mother, we're your family." "Surely. Family visits more than twice a year, David. Family calls. Family doesn't disappear for 3 months. And then expect everything to remain unchanged. We've been busy. You know how it is." "I do know. I know you canceled the transfers I was sending you. I know you cut off access to the credit card. Is that what this is about? Punishing me?" Margaret's grip tightened on the phone. "This isn't about punishment. This is about recognizing reality. You want my estate, but you don't want me. You want my money, but not my company. I'm simply adjusting my expectations accordingly. That's not fair, isn't it? Tell me, David, when was the last time you visited just to see me, not to discuss the property, not to ask for money, but simply because you wanted to spend time with your mother?" He had no answer. "I thought so," Margaret said quietly. "I hope you and Jennifer have a lovely Christmas." She hung up before he could respond. On Christmas Day, Rachel came to the estate with arms full of packages. She had baked cookies, made tamales from her grandmother's recipe, brought a small tree already decorated with lights. They cooked together, laughed together, watched old movies together. Rusty dozed by the fireplace. Snow began to fall outside the windows. It was, Margaret realized, the best Christmas she'd had in years. As they were cleaning up after dinner, Rachel said hesitantly, "Margaret, there's something I need to tell you. I've been offered a position at a veterinary practice in Oregon. It's an amazing opportunity, better pay, a chance to specialize in large animals. But it would mean moving, and she paused. "I don't want to leave you." Margaret's heart squeezed. Here was this beautiful young woman, this person who had brought light back into her life, contemplating sacrificing her future out of concern for an old woman she barely knew. You have to take it, Margaret said firmly. But Rachel, listen to me. You have your whole life ahead of you. You can't build it around taking care of me. I won't allow it. Tears filled Rachel's eyes. You've done so much for me. You've shown me what kindness looks like, what real family feels like. How can I just leave? Margaret took Rachel's hands in hers. By living your life fully, by being happy, that's all I want for you. They embraced, both crying now, holding tight to this unexpected friendship that had bloomed in the darkest season. Rachel left for Oregon in mid-January. They promised to stay in touch, to call and write. Margaret stood in her doorway watching Rachel's car disappear down the long drive and felt the ache of another goodbye. But this goodbye was different. This was release, not abandonment. This was love that wanted the best for someone else, even when it meant being alone again. February brought bitter cold. Margaret caught a flu that settled into her chest and wouldn't let go. She should have gone to the doctor, but she was stubborn, had always been stubborn. She would fight it off. She was strong, but she wasn't as strong as she thought. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, Margaret collapsed in her kitchen. She woke in a hospital room with tubes running into her arms and an oxygen mask covering her face. A nurse leaned over her, smiling gently. "Welcome back, Mrs. Harrison. You gave us quite a scare." "Pneumonia," the doctor told her. "Severe." If her neighbor hadn't noticed her newspapers piling up and called for a welfare check, it might have been much worse. The neighbor, not David, a neighbor Margaret barely knew had saved her life. She spent 5 days in the hospital. Rachel called daily from Oregon, her voice tight with worry. Samuel Chen visited, bringing flowers and magazines. Various neighbors stopped by with cards and well wishes. David didn't call. David didn't visit. It was Samuel who finally told her. "Margaret, I thought you should know. I ran into David and Jennifer at a restaurant last week. They asked how you were doing. I told them you'd been ill." And Samuel's expression was grim. Jennifer said, and I quote, "Well, maybe this will make her see reason about selling that property before she's too sick to make decisions." Margaret closed her eyes. Even this, even her hospitalization was, to them, simply an opportunity. Another angle to exploit. "Samuel," she said, "I want to add something to my will. If I become incapacitated, if I'm unable to make my own decisions, I want you to have medical power of attorney, not David. You, Margaret, please. I can't trust him. I need to know someone I trust will make decisions in my best interest, not his." Samuel nodded slowly. "I'll draw up the papers." Margaret was released from the hospital in late February. She returned to her empty house, to rooms that echoed with silence. The doctor had ordered rest, had warned her about pushing too hard, but rest felt impossible when the quiet was so overwhelming. In March, David finally called. "Mother, I heard you were sick." "I was. I'm better now." "Why didn't you tell me?" The question was so absurd Margaret almost laughed. "When would would I have told you, David, during one of our frequent conversations, during your regular visits? That's not fair. You're right. Nothing about this is fair. What do you want, David? Jennifer and I have been talking. We think, given your recent health issues, it's more important than ever to make decisions about the estate. We want to help you, Mother. We want to take care of you. Take care of her. The words rang hollow. I've made my decisions, Margaret said. They don't require your input. Mother, please, can we at least talk about this? In person, Margaret hesitated. Part of her, the part that still remembered the little boy who had crawled into her lap when he had nightmares, wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that perhaps, finally, he truly cared. But she had learned. She had learned that love given is not always love returned. That sacrifice is not always appreciated, that sometimes the people you pour yourself into see you only as a resource to be tapped. No, David, I don't think we have anything to discuss. Fine. His voice turned hard. But don't expect me to be there when you need me. Don't expect me to take care of you when you're old and sick and can't manage alone. Margaret felt something break inside her, some last fragile hope. David, I have never expected anything from you except basic decency and respect, but I see now that even that was too much to ask. She hung up. This time, she didn't cry. She had no tears left. Spring came to the estate with its usual glory. Apple blossoms painted the orchards white and pink. The roses Thomas had planted bloomed in profusion. Birds returned, filling the air with song. Margaret tended her gardens, walked her land, felt strength slowly returning to her body. Rachel called every week. She was thriving in Oregon, was seeing someone new, a kind man who loved animals as much as she did. Margaret listened to Rachel's happiness and felt genuine joy for her. In April, Margaret received a letter from a local community college. They were interested in purchasing a portion of her land to build a new agriculture program, a place where students could learn farming and horticulture hands-on. Would she consider meeting with them? Margaret met with the college president and the head of their agriculture department. They showed her their vision, their plans for sustainable farming education, for helping young people from rural communities gain skills and knowledge. It was exactly what Thomas would have wanted. Margaret sold them 10 acres at a below-market price, with the stipulation that the program be named the Thomas Harrison Center for Agricultural Education. The college agreed. The sale brought in money that would sustain her comfortably for the rest of her life. In May, Samuel called with news. Margaret, I thought you should know. David filed a legal challenge to your will. He's claiming undue influence and mental incapacity. Margaret had been expecting this. It still hurt, but she had been expecting it. Let him, she said quietly. I have medical records proving my competency. I have witnesses to my decision-making process. Let him waste his money on lawyers. The legal battle dragged through summer and into fall. David's lawyers tried every angle, claiming Margaret was senile, was being manipulated, wasn't capable of making sound decisions. Samuel countered with medical evaluations, testimony from neighbors and friends, documentation of Margaret's careful, deliberate decision-making. In October, a judge reviewed the case and ruled in Margaret's favor. The will stood. David's challenge was dismissed. The judge's written opinion included a pointed comment about adult children who contest wills out of greed rather than genuine concern. David was ordered to pay court costs. Margaret felt no triumph in the victory, only sadness. Sadness for the relationship that could have been, for the son she had lost long before any legal battles began. On Thanksgiving, Rachel came home for a visit. She brought her boyfriend, Marcus, a gentle giant of a man with an easy smile. They cooked together in Margaret's kitchen, the three of them moving around each other in comfortable choreography. Rachel told stories about her work, about the animals she had treated, the lives she had saved. After dinner, as they sat by the fire, Rachel said quietly, "Margaret, Marcus, and I are getting engaged, and I was hoping. I know this is asking a lot, but I was hoping you might be there. At the wedding, as family." Margaret's vision blurred with tears. "I would be honored." And Rachel continued, taking Margaret's hand, "We were wondering if you might consider selling us a few acres. We want to build a home, start our lives here, close to you, if you'll have us." Margaret couldn't speak. She could only nod, tears streaming down her face as Rachel embraced her. They were married the following spring, in the orchard under blooming apple trees. Margaret walked Rachel down the aisle, her heart so full she thought it might burst. After the ceremony, as she watched Rachel and Marcus dance, Samuel approached her. "You did a good thing, Margaret, with Rachel, with the college, with all of it." Margaret thought about that, about the estate she had protected, the foundation she had established, the young people who would benefit from Thomas's legacy, about Rachel, who had become the daughter she never had, about Marcus, who called her Mom Margaret and meant it. David hadn't come to the wedding. She had sent him an invitation, hoping perhaps he might surprise her, but he hadn't responded. "I did what Thomas would have wanted," Margaret said finally. "I protected what we built. I made sure it mattered." A year later, on a crisp autumn morning, Margaret woke feeling strange, lightheaded, disconnected from her body. She managed to call 911, managed to get her door unlocked before she collapsed. The stroke was massive. By the time Rachel and Marcus reached the hospital, the doctors were grim. "She's stable for now, but the damage is extensive. You should prepare yourselves." Rachel held Margaret's hand, crying softly. Marcus stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder. Margaret drifted in and out of consciousness. She heard voices, felt Rachel's tears on her fingers. And then, in a moment of clarity, she heard another voice. "David, Mother, Mother, can you hear me?" She opened her eyes with effort. David stood at the foot of her bed, Jennifer beside him. He looked older, grayer than she remembered. His face was drawn with an emotion she couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Mother, for everything, for being selfish and blind and cruel, for not seeing what I had until it was too late, for wasting so much time on things that didn't matter. Please, please forgive me." Margaret wanted to speak, wanted to tell him yes, of course. She forgave him. She had never stopped loving him, even when he had hurt her. But her body wouldn't obey. Her voice wouldn't come. Rachel leaned close. "Margaret, I think she's trying to say something." Margaret gathered every ounce of strength she possessed. She looked at David, really looked at him, and saw the boy he had been beneath the man he had become. She saw his grief, his regret, his belated understanding of all he had thrown away. She managed one word, barely a whisper: "Legacy." And then darkness pulled her under. Margaret Harrison died 3 days later, surrounded by Rachel, Marcus, Samuel, and David. Her funeral was held in the orchard she had loved, attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched, former students she had taught, neighbors she had helped, scholarship recipients from the foundation she had established. David spoke at the service, his voice thick with tears. "My mother taught me many things, though I was too foolish to learn most of them until it was too late. She taught me that love is more than words, that sacrifice without appreciation diminishes both the giver and the receiver, that what we build matters less than who we build it for. I only wish I had learned these lessons while she was still here to know it." Rachel scattered Margaret's ashes in the rose garden next to where Thomas rested. The estate transferred as Margaret had planned. The foundation thrived, sending dozens of students to college each year. The agricultural center at the college bore Thomas's name and Margaret's vision. David received his $50,000. He donated it all to the scholarship fund in his mother's name. Years later, when people spoke of Margaret Harrison, they remembered different things. Some remembered her kindness. Some remembered her strength. Some remembered the legacy she left, the lives she changed, the love she gave so freely. But those who knew her best remembered something else. They remembered that Margaret Harrison, faced with betrayal and loss, chose dignity. She chose to let go of what wounded her and embrace what healed her. She chose to build something lasting rather than hold onto something broken. She chose herself, and in choosing herself, she became exactly what Thomas had always known her to be: not just a mother, not just a wife, but a woman of profound strength and quiet grace, who understood that the truest inheritance we leave is not property or money, but the example of how we live. Margaret's story ended in that hospital room, but her legacy would last generations. If Margaret's story moved you, please like this video and subscribe. This channel is dedicated to stories about dignity, legacy, and the quiet strength it takes to choose yourself. Thank you for being here.